Mr. Speaker, this is the third time the Prime Minister has announced a plan to come out of national lockdown. In the past, we've emerged without sufficient caution, without a clear plan, and without listening to the science. We can't afford to make those mistakes again. This has to be the last lockdown. Now, the vaccine rollout, as the Prime Minister said, has been remarkable, and I want to pay tribute to everybody involved. It is the light at the end of the tunnel. But if we're going to get there, we have to tread very carefully. So I'm glad the Prime Minister spoke today of caution, of this being irreversible, of assessing the data and following the evidence. Those are the right guiding principles. And I have to say it's a welcome change from some of the language the Prime Minister has used in the past. And I urge the Prime Minister now to stick to that. Turning to the substance of the matter, first, schools. We all agree that the priority must be for all children to be back in school as quickly as possible and to stay in school. We want that to happen on March the 8th, as the government has promised. Confidence of parents, teachers and school staff will be critical. So can the Prime Minister please confirm that the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Officer support the full reopening of all schools on March the 8th? And will he commit to publishing all the relevant medical evidence on this issue? Can the Prime Minister also indicate what the government is doing to overcome the huge logistical challenges this presents? The Prime Minister touched on mass testing in his statement, but there was nothing on Nightingale classrooms and extra capacity. This is a huge problem, particularly for schools with smaller buildings. So can the Prime Minister update the House on how he's going to deal with this in just over 2 weeks' time? Let me turn to a linked issue. Within weeks of schools returning last autumn, thousands of teachers and school staff were self-isolating, causing huge disruption to the running of schools and children's learning. We don't want that again. That's why we called for the early vaccination of all teachers and school staff. In my own constituency, the fantastic Crick Institute, which has been doing amazing work, has been vaccinating hundreds of people a day. They've been very clear to me and publicly that they could be doing more. And it's obvious to me that over one weekend, they could have vaccinated all teachers and school staff in Camden if they'd been allowed to do so, and without bumping anyone else from the priority list. There are similar examples across the country. So will the Prime Minister see what more can be done to speed up the vaccination of teachers and school staff to ensure that children and young people not only return to school on March the 8th, but stay in school having returned? Let me turn then to isolation support. As we release health measures, however gradually, there's a risk that infection rates will go up. The Prime Minister made that clear in his statement. Therefore, it's more important than ever that test, trace and isolate is working and working well. One of the most concerning figures in a recent SAGE report is that only 3 in 10 people who should be self-isolating are actually doing so. And it's obvious that one of the main drivers of this is insecurity at work. As the chair of Test and Trace has said, people are scared to take the test because they can't afford to self-isolate. That not only harms our health response, it costs the economy too, and it's got to be fixed. We've proposed that the £500 isolation payment, which is currently only available to 1 in 8 workers, be made available to everyone who needs it. Will the Prime Minister consider that? Because if we don't shift the 3 in 10 figure, there'll be a huge hole in our defences. Third, Mr. Speaker, economic support. The Prime Minister announced a roadmap today, but it won't have escaped businesses that many of them will not be able to open until mid-April at the earliest, and many until mid-June. Now, I'm not questioning the health basis for that decision, which I support. But I am reiterating what we've always said, that health restrictions must be accompanied by proper economic support. And it makes no sense to announce today that businesses will be closed for many more weeks or months without announcing new economic support at the same time. The Prime Minister says, well, the budget will be next week. But there's nothing stopping him saying today that business rates relief will be extended, that furlough will be extended, or that the VAT cut for hospitality and leisure will also be extended. Businesses are crying out for that certainty, and the Prime Minister should give it to them today. The Prime Minister should also announce proper support for the 3 million self-employed who've been left out of all support for the last year. This morning on LBC, I was asked about this again by a self-employed businesswoman who's at her wit's end at the lack of government support. This roadmap means that she may not be able to get up and running again in her business until mid-June. So surely the Prime Minister needs to act now to close the gaps for these 3 million. Mr. Speaker, we support the twin principles that the Prime Minister has set out today, that lifting of restrictions must be both cautious and irreversible. But I know the Prime Minister will come under pressure from those on his own benches to go faster and to throw caution to the wind. Last week it was reported that around 60 of his own members of Parliament called for the end of all restrictions by the end of April. I'm sure there are going to be similar calls this afternoon. I hope the Prime Minister takes the opportunity to face this down. Because if this roadmap is to work, he needs to listen to the Chief Scientific Officer and the Chief Medical Officer, not the honourable members for Wickham or the Forest of Dean. If the Prime Minister does, he will have our support and will secure a majority in the House. If he does not, we will waste all the sacrifices of the last 12 months. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.